In this video, I'm going to show you how you can take your own custom 3D character models and bring them into Unreal Engine 5 to produce high quality images and videos for your portfolios and presentations. Let's get it. Hey, I'm Jay, and this is how you can render your own custom characters. This video comes pretty highly requested. A lot of you wanted to know more about how you can do your own custom materials and renders and things like that. So I made this video to serve as kind of an overview of the whole process to get started. And by the end, we'll have some, pretty tricky things and some high quality images. We're gonna start with an empty project and then build it all the way up and bring in our assets so that we finish with high quality images. Now this video was originally done as a whole real-time demo for my Patreon members, so the entire video lives there unedited, along with lots of other videos and exclusive content if you're into this sort of thing. Also, if you really want to learn more on how to make your own characters, stick around to the end of the video. I have sort of an announcement of something that I'm working on that you might be interested in. Okay, now we're going to start with Unreal Engine 5 and we'll create our project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the Unreal Engine, and you can see I've got the MetaHumans demo. Now I'm going to start with the demo and I'm going to make a clone of this because I need the eyes. It wasn't easy. So I thought the simplest way is let's just clone this MetaHumans project. And I did that for my Flex project. And then you can look at all their materials and use a lot of their textures anyways. I think it's like 5 gigs. All right, render demo. Boom, there we go. Cool, so we have a clone of it now. So like I say, we need the eye material in Epic's official documentation. They even say, even for shipped projects, to just use their eye, because not only is it an awesome material, it does some fancy things and some things that are hard coded. Even in my professional projects, the goal is to use their eye. It falls under the same licensing as the whole engine anyways. So it's going to compile right now. You can see in the lower right here. Here we go, it's compiled. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna make a new level. We don't need all this stuff. You can actually delete this stuff if you wanna make your project lighter. There's lots of like blueprints and sample metahumans that you don't need, but you do wanna keep the materials and stuff. So, but we're gonna make a new level, file new level, and we're just gonna do an empty level, not an open world one, but just an empty level. So there we go. We've got our blank scene and we're ready to go. Now let's talk about the source assets that we're gonna be bringing in here, right? So if we jump over to Maya, okay, so here we are in Maya. Whatever DCC program you kind of wanna use is fine. But just to go over, how this is set up, there's just a single group with all my meshes in here and, extra group here. This is just for my own organization. It's just easier for me to select like a single group. So this is what we're gonna export as an FBX, which keeps the names and the material assignments. That's important. If I come over here to the Hypershade, you can see I have materials here and these materials are named. This also becomes important because once this model is in Unreal, these names help me to find what things are. So just a quick basic Maya thing is you can't have 2 things with the same name. So you'll see meshes, I put the word mesh or geo at the end, not very consistent, but you get what I mean. So, I know that these are geo and meshes. And then for materials, nowadays, I just like to say what it is, like head. So it keeps it simple. Okay, so here's our mesh. So let's export this, bring it over into Unreal. So let's go File, Export Selection. We're gonna make it an FBX, okay? And now I'm gonna go to our new project, Render Demo, and now we're gonna make a new folder. So in Content, why don't we make a new folder called Characters? You could also just do character or girl. If you're not gonna have more than one character, maybe you don't need to do this, but whatever, I'll just show you. Here we go, and then we'll make a folder in the characters folder. So this is our girl folder, and then in here we'll make some more folders. All right, so we're gonna do meshes. All right, open, and then we're gonna call this girl _ SM. So I use SM because it's a static mesh. That's actually what we're gonna be look deving and rendering. In this case, it's gonna stop there. But in other scenarios, if you were to animate it, then you would generate an SKM, which is a different kind of asset, but everything like visually would translate over. So this is a non-animating object. So you don't need to do this, but this is why I'm doing it, okay? Just for extra organization and out of habit, I guess. So you can see not much going on in the FBX stuff. I've got the smooth mesh. I've disabled animation, and that's it. So it's really simple. I even unchecked camera. If it doesn't have this data, it probably isn't going to export anyway. But just so you know, this is the settings. Defaults probably work. Going to export it. Here it goes. Now, if we hop back over to Unreal, you can see I'm greeted with the FBX import settings now. So this happens automatically. This is going to be useful later when you're iterating. I just want to speak really quick on the FBX import settings. There's 2 things that I would change at the beginning of every new project. You only have to do this once, and then from here on out, it's going to remember. The one you need to do is combine meshes is true. It might be that I'm starting from this project, but if you start a project from scratch, combined meshes will be off. So that's in the mesh tab. It's in the advanced. So make sure combined meshes is on. And then also this is the mesh category. In material, it says create new materials. No, don't do that. I'm going to make my own materials. It even says import textures. No, don't do that. So I'm going to make my own materials, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, so I'm going to import this. It's giving me some errors, unfortunately. You know, my mesh is probably jank or whatever, but okay, now if we go over to in the lower left here in our content browser, you can see in our characters, hey, we got our girl folder and we got our mesh. There it is. Now, I also like to change the size of these. These are a little big. All right, so now we can just drag the mesh, boop, right in here, and I'm going to put it at 0, 0, 0, and that's where we can just put everything. Again, in our case, we're using this as a render scene. We can render multiple characters once you have this project set up. You can just bring meshes in here. So it makes sense to just put it at the world origin. That way, when you drop things in, you know where you can put stuff. So now you can see it looks a little strange right here. It's because we don't have lights. So why don't we start with that? We'll make a light. So in Unreal Engine 5, you could come up here and then we're going to use a rect light. Always use rect lights. Good rule of thumb when it comes to doing character portraits and stuff. These kind of simulate softboxes, and that's what we would use to light a portrait if we were doing some kind of photograph or film or something. So you can even add a texture to it. You can see source texture if you wanted to like get an HDR softbox image just to get some subtle difference in the reflections, you know. Here in the upper right, this little toggle is going to let me change the pivot orientation to the actual object. It's going to help me position stuff. Also, you can see there's snap going on. I don't really like that. Here's snap for rotation. There we go. And I'll probably just also turn off snap for movement. So now everything I can do whatever I want. All right, so we got a light already, right? Great. Let's move on to talking about materials and then we'll massage the lighting. Okay, so now we already have a super basic setup. I'm going to save this. If you hit Control-Shift-S, it'll save all. And in this case, I don't have a level yet. So we'll go to level, levels, and then we'll go, we'll just go rendering demo level. Makes sense. Lighting needs to be built. No. So you can see here in the light setting, see it says stationary. That's no bueno. We want everything to be movable because we want everything to be dynamic. That's how you get the highest quality, and that's what you do for characters because they move around, obviously. Unreal Engine can do really nice static lighting that's baked, but we're not doing any of that. So a way to ensure that is just to make it movable. You can see our error went away now. Okay, so there we go. So we have an empty level. We have a model. Sweet. Why don't we make a basic material and then we'll continue on with the scene. Okay, so the little material preface here. Materials in Unreal is one of the major differences, I think, from other software. And I think something that people get tripped up on, right? Especially when you compare to something like Marmoset. When you go down the pros and cons list of rendering 3D models, at the top, Marmoset is really easy to use. And Unreal's got all these extra steps. Now with Unreal, I think because it's just so infinitely customizable, it can be daunting to get into and things are kind of spread apart and you have to like kind of build things, you know, out of parts. Like you have to build things out of Legos. So that's what we're gonna do. Before we get started, I think I wanna impart the general principle when it comes to creating materials in Unreal is to first create a master material and then create instances from it. So we don't get to just drag and drop a blend or a Phong material, which you might be familiar with already, right? So what we're gonna first do is make the blend material. And then from then on out, we can create instances and assign them, okay? Now, the reason why we wanna do that is because later on, we're gonna make a master material for skin. Now we can do that and then make instances and apply them to characters. And if at any point we find a problem or we think, aha, I wanna add a new feature, we'll add it to that master material and it'll populate all the instances. So it's the best practice, keeps things simple, everything is tied up. That way you're only juggling, you know, the few master materials that you're making. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make our first master material. Okay, so we got characters and we have girl. Why don't we make a materials folder in our characters folder? Boop. Now, is this good practice? Probably not, but you know, it's gonna keep it simple. In our materials folder, we'll make a masters folder. There we go, point. Now let's make a new material. Boo, there we go. And we'll call it basic M. M for master. Now you'll see Epic names their things first. They put the M in the front. It's a matter of preference, do whatever you want. I put it at the end. M for master material, okay? So here's our basic master material. Now, we're just gonna create a basic PBR material that lets us tweak the parameters to make metals and non-metals. And this can work just for like, you know, basic props and stuff. And then we'll get more advanced from here. We're going to make something for the base color and the metallic property, roughness, and that's about it. And then we can see what we can do with just that. Okay, so we're just going to get started here and we'll get more advanced as we move on. So we're going to make a constant. So at any time, you can always right click and then search, so constant, boom. Now constants are really popular, when you're building these graphs. So you can actually just hold the hotkey of 1 and click and you'll get a constant too. All right, so here we go. We have a constant. Now what a constant is, if it's not clear, is just a number that is solid and the material instance, it's not exposed. Okay, so this is like a behind the scenes, like this is just what it is. So we're gonna make this a value of 0.45. There you go. And we're gonna put that into the specular power. Most materials are about 0.45 on the specular power. They vary, from like 0.35 to 0.5 on this like linear scale. But most materials in the world are like this, except for metals. Lucky for us in Unreal, when you make something metallic, it automatically makes a specular 1. So we can just plug this in. There you go. Now let's start making some nodes that can be exposed in the material instance. This will make more sense in a second. If you're lost already, hold on. So we're going to make a couple more nodes here that are going to be exposed that let us or other artists tweak the material. So we're going to do that by making them parameters. So instead of holding down 1, we can hold down S and click, and now we have a scalar parameter. So I can name this metalness. I'm going to plug it into metallic, and we'll just have it default at 0. And now let's make another scalar parameter. We can also just duplicate it. There you go. And then at any time if you want to rename something in Unreal, you press F2, roughness, and then we'll go roughness, boom. And then for default, maybe we'll do 0.5 for this one. There we go. So we already got something cooking here. Now let's make a color. We need color, right? So this is going to be our most customizable node, and we're going to use what's called a 3 vector. That sounds super sciencey. If I hold 3 on the keyboard and hit, bam, there we go, 3 vector. But really what the vectors are is R, G, and B. So what we're doing here is doing a color picker. That's what this is. See? Now you'll see. Now I want this to be exposed to the material instance so that we can change it so anybody can change it, right? That's what's going on with these two as opposed to this one, as you can kind of tell by it not having a name and a default. So if I right click this, I can convert it to a parameter and I can call this base color. And then this top node is going to be all of them, RGB and alpha, and I can just go into base color. All right. So maybe we don't want the default to be like white. Maybe we want it to be like middle gray, so now we'll save this, boink. All right. Now we're going to start making some materials. Okay. So here's our basic master material. Great. So now what we can do is start making instances. So let's say create, right click, create material instance. And so we'll just say shirt and now MI. So now we got shirt MI material instance, right? Now this is in the masters folder just because, that's how it happened. So I can click and drag it into materials and hit move. Boop. Moved out. So here we go. We have our shirt material instance. So we can come in here and we can start tweaking things now, or we could do it on the character, which might be more fun, right? So let's say we do that. Let's go to our character now and we'll double click the static mesh. And here we go. We have our asset properties for the static mesh that we exported. Here she is. We don't really need this viewer, but you can see here, those material names we made before coming in handy now. So shirt is this one, and then we'll just drag it in there. Boink. Shirt, save. Now this static mesh has this material instance applied. If we close Unreal and bring it open, it'll still be there. If we drop this static mesh into another level, it'll be there. So that's how you have to do it. You have to drag it into the actual asset viewer and then save that asset. So let's do a couple quick little tweaks here to the material. Okay, double click it. So here's our base color. So cloth is rough, right? If this was, really low, that means it wouldn't be rough at all. So it's like a mirror surface. Right now we just have our area light to reflect our rect light. And if we go all the way up, it's completely rough. Now, something we can actually do here, let's get a little fancy here. If we double click our master material here, we can put a min and a max. Now let's see. Can I overcrank it now? Nope. Now I've capped it to 0 and 1. Fancy. So yeah, now full rough would be full rough. Not everything is full rough. And actually, if you do like 0.8, that'd be good for cloth, even though it feels like it should be really, really rough. But everything reflects some light. So, all right, now she's got a pink shirt. Sweet. So now let's make some more instances. Shall we? Let's look at the things we need here. We need some seams. That's for her shirt, I know. So I can just duplicate this, call it seams. And we'll drag this on there. Why don't we? Cool. And for the seams, why don't we make it just kind of a different color or something, There we go. That's our couple simple materials with this. Why don't we now do some metals here? We need some metals, don't we? We need gold. We need silver. So we can actually bring up Unreal PBR gold. See if we get that documentation. Here we go. So I'll try to link this down below, but check this out. So if we come in here, it's going over some of the stuff we're talking about right now. And here you go. You have base color intensities for different things, and you have the actual base color RGB for things. So here's gold. So why don't we just copy pasta this? Shall we? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna duplicate this. We're gonna call it gold MI, and we're gonna put it on the gold. We'll come in here and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so double click this guy and let's open our RGB and see what we got. R1, G 0.766 and 0.336. There's gold, doink. And then metalness will be 1. There we go. And then roughness, let's do like 0.1, maybe 0.15, a little rough, you know what I mean? And let's see what we got here with that. There we go. Now, as we add more light to the scene, this will behave more like gold. So we can do the same for silver, probably. Platinum, 0.62, 0.62, 0.58, something like that. Okay, we'll put that somewhere on the silver. There we go, silver. Now, you don't have to be this accurate, by the way. You can just eyeball this stuff. I just thought I would show you that that's what is cool about PBR, is it's a standard. Now, it's not like value to value a standard between all the different renderers, but the renderers have gone through and documented what it is. So in this case, you could go to Unreal stuff and see like the big basic stuff, and that'll inform you how to make your own things too. Okay, so let's move on here and finish this. We'll do plastic MI. That's gonna go into the choker, and plastic is gonna be 0. And roughness will be, I don't know, let's see what that's like. And then nothing ever goes pure black. Another tip for you. You want to come up a little bit, so maybe 0.1 or something. See what that looks like. Actually looks, maybe that's a little too bright. Maybe 0.05, 0.02. Still seems pretty dark. Let's see, is it the roughness that's doing me? We'll see. It might be the auto exposure, which we'll talk about in a second. So we've got our basic materials down now. Another little thing I'm gonna do as I move forward editing this is I'm going to change my camera FOV just because it helps me with faces and stuff. You know, instead of 90, maybe we could just do 50 or something. So that'll help me. Okay. We've made some basic material instances that we instance from our basic master material, and we can get way more advanced from there. So let's start stepping it up. Let's talk about the skin. Let's talk about the face. Before we get into doing the master material for the skin, we got to import some textures, right? So back in Unreal, we'll go girl. We've got a meshes folder. Now we're going to do, we'll open it up. Here we are. And then here is our textures. So here's the girl textures we'll be using. Just going to drag them in here. And then back in Unreal, there we go. We have them imported. You can see just by the naming, it's figured out what they are. Great. And then if I save everything, it's going to save these U assets. That's what I'm looking at right here in my content tray. So it's now created U assets from the PNGs or Targas or whatever it is. So these are the textures that we're going to use for the skin. Now, these were made in Substance Painter and exported from there. So why don't we take a look at that right now? So over here in Substance Painter, this is the source scene for those textures. You can see, you know, organized as such. I did make another video on the texturing process, but really what we could take a look at here is if we go to the export settings under girl, you'll see I have a preset. So if we go to this export preset, so you can see here the base color channel, and this is the naming convention. And then here's that, you know, packed map that has the AO and the roughness and metalness. And then I put a user 0 in here that I can use, and then the normal map. So this is it. And then in the alpha channel, the base color, I also put scattering, which we could use, you know, with the skin stuff. Doesn't do much though, you know, to be fair, but there you go. So this is exporting things from there. And then for the normal map, I am exporting 8K, like I said. Okay. So that's how I made these textures, and that's how I exported these files, which we imported right here. Now let's make a skin master material and hook these up. All right, so coming to our materials folder, we'll do a new material, call it skin M. Save that. All right, now the difference between the basic one that we made and the skin right off the bat. Obviously with skin, we want it to be translucent, do some extra fancy things. To do that, we need to change the shading model. So we're gonna change it from default lit to subsurface profile, which lets us use this subsurface profile. Now, we could use one here, or we could create a new one. So let's do that. And we'll just put it in our girl folder. So we'll do girl subsurface profile, okay? Created it, So if we open it, here we go. So just to quickly glance through here, you know, the defaults are pretty good already. I will say what's really cool, and we can edit this later on the model, is the dual specular lobe. So this is pretty cool. Give us those 2 specks, which we've talked about in other rendering videos, which really help to make skin look nice and more naturalistic. So why don't we just keep these defaults actually? So I'll save this and then we can tweak those later. Okay, so here we have our graph. So let's start making a basic skin material. Okay, so we're gonna make a couple more constants. So let's do that. 1, we're gonna do the spec again. Now the spec value for skin, if you want to go by their documentation, 0.35 is what they recommend. We can go 0.4. We could always expose this too, by the way, if we want to, and then you could tweak it however you want, but we'll keep it like this for now. Okay, now instead of using constants and stuff for everything, we're going to use texture parameters. Search for texture parameter or texture sample. Sorry, there we go. Then we'll get this texture sample. We can convert it to a parameter. So for this one, we'll call it base color map. Okay, so there we go. Now we can import our texture map to here. So we're just going to duplicate this twice. This one will be our normal map. This one will be our combined map. Cool. Okay, so pretty straightforward for the base color and for the normal. And we're getting an error because I'm not pointing at anything. Combined map, we're gonna go red to ambient occlusion. If you remember when we did a little quick overview, green will go to roughness and blue will go to metalness. Again, we can see that like if we look over here, right? And we come in here, red AO, green roughness, blue metalness. And you can also, you know, double check by looking at the texture. So if I come in here and I say girl, I think I named it PBR. Here you go. So here's those channels, red, green, blue. Okay, I'm going to choose my girl texture maps here, but you know, strictly speaking, like best practice, if you were going to make these materials and share them, you would choose default materials that are in all the Unreal Engine projects. But we're making a very specific scene, so I'm not worried about it. And it helps with this demo so you can see what we're looking at here. That's what you would probably want to do if you're making a master to like move between projects, because these are now pathed, right, to our specific ones. But again, for our character, it's going to be okay. All right, so there's our master material. Now, before we go, we do have something that is important for skin materials, and that's the opacity. This controls the light scattering. So unlike the other materials and unlike other shading models, you know, opacity isn't like transparency. It's used for the translucency. So we want to make it 1 for now. All right, so now we'll save this. Cool. So now let's make an instance. Okay, here's our skin MI. We'll move it out of here. There we go. There's our head. So coming in a little waxy. So we can expose some of these things. Why don't we? And then we can see what they do. So I converted those to parameters, remember? So that's going to expose them. So now you can see here's our maps that we have, and we made those parameters so we can check this box and change it if we wanted. That's how you do it normally, right? This would be a default texture, but we just hard coded our custom one in there. So now opacity, if we were to change this, you can see, right? So 0 would be, it's not subsurface, right? So now we could try doing that map. Remember the base color map had an alpha channel? So I actually have it, you know, piping in some textures, including like with the makeup not being subsurface, and then the nose and ears being a little bit more. So, you know, it's an example of putting some detail in the actual translucency. So over here in the master material, let's put this in there, and then we might leave this in here because we might do something fancy in a second. So we'll save this, see what this looks like. Okay, so we got it back a little bit right now. Probably want to fine tune it even more. So to do that, we can multiply this. So let's break out a new fancy node here. So what we're going to do is, let's name this so you see what I'm saying. SS strength. Makes sense. Subsurface strength. You know, let's try to be clear here. So we have this black and white values driving the strength of the SS now. White would be the strongest. So that would be 1, and then 0 would be black. So if we multiply that, then, you know, 0 times 1 would be 0. Right? So we get to control the strength with a multiply node. So multiply is another really popular node. So I can hold down M. There you go. And you can see I got an A and a B. So we'll go A, the alpha channel, B, the strength, and then boom, right into opacity. So now we have control over this. You know, 1 or white times it would be the same, right? 1 times anything is the same. So let's check this. We got strength. So now again, 0 is nothing. And now we can just dial in, you know, what we want. Oh, maybe that's too much. You know, we can actually just use this slider. And to be super clear too, remember the girl subsurface profile. This also has stuff. Oh, here we go. I think this just changes like how far the light goes. So, you know, we just want this edge bleed right here. You can change stuff. So why don't we play around with this roughness too? So if we did 0.5, that should mix both, right? So we could do 0.6 and then 1.5 and mix them a bit. All right, let's save this. before we get too complicated with the materials, let's bring in the eye. That's the main reason why we use this project, right, to begin with, and then we'll be material complete here, right? So we can come up to the content. We can just type in eye refractive. Here we go. MI refractive. Yeah, these are all instances. Cool. So we can create an instance here, and then we're going to drag that instance into our girl directory before we lose it. There we go. And we'll name it girl eye. If I could see what I was typing, this would be so much better. This is torture for you, I'm sure. Now let's apply that. Come over here. Boom. There we go. I should mention now, right, back here in the source meshes, these eyes meshes I took from a MetaHuman project. So you could either export a MetaHuman mesh or use the Quixel bridge to bring in a file, but it's important that the UVs are exactly how they made them. Okay, so you could redo them, but it's like, why? You know, might as well. It is important to note when you mirror them that you have to flip the UVs for whatever reason. So these two UVs are not identically stacked. One of them is flipped horizontally. Just a little note there. If one of your eyes looks super weird, that's why. Okay, cool. So let's really quick do like an overview though of this eye and why it's so cool. It's all of these features also because obviously like it's faking the depth, the refraction, the fact that we can come to the side and we can see the pupil. In offline rendering, you get that by doing glass and it really like traces the path and everything, but they're doing some fancy real-time stuff using parallax occlusion mapping and stuff and some other things I'm sure. I'm just going to note a few that are important parameters, you know, to change. There's a bunch. You can play with all these, but iris UV radius, super useful. I get to choose the size of my eye. There's also iris saturation. That's how I did the flex eye right there. But yeah, we can change it, right? And then Limbus, which is cool down here. Limbus dark scale, Limbus dark power. So that gets darker, right? Around the edges. And then you can change the scale too if you want to. Less or more. But that's a pretty cool little feature there too. Okay. And then also the sclera, you have refraction control. You have sclera control. Right now, sclera brightness, you know, seems like a lot. There you go. I'll just make it like 0.8 or something. Before we go too farther on, want to mention another thing that's important, which is the auto exposure. Just so you're aware that it's there, I'm going to disable it now. Things might get a little bit more complicated, but it's going to give me more control. Something that people probably don't expect is that Unreal has like automatic exposure going on. So if I look off screen and I look back there, I see the exposure changing. That just makes things more difficult for me. You know, I'm juggling values and stuff. So we're going to come to our project settings. I'm going to type in exposure. You see auto exposure is on. I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so there you go. So this is the actual true exposure. So it was stopping down a lot, and that's why the eyes were white. So I'm going to come here to my rect light. I'm going to start dropping it. So there's 1 and 2 is pretty good. So we'll leave it on 2 for now. That's going to help us set the values of things like specular intensity and base color intensity stuff, because we have like this one less variable to worry about. As we get into cameras and stuff, you're going to see auto exposure gets a little bit complicated. It's going to make things easier for us to control every aspect and kind of understand what's going on. Now, before we move on from the eyes completely, I should also say, you know, one of the things that I get asked a question about is how do you change the eye color or whatever. You can just, you know, easily just choose a new texture. So if we were to hop over to custom textures I made, I can look at some additional textures here. Here's an iris. I just opened their iris and I did some tweaks in Photoshop. Also, you can see it's a straight up PSD file. So I can just like copy this, right? And then open up my project directory, go to my content folder, characters, girl, textures. Here we go. My U assets that it made. I can actually put the source asset right in here. There you go. It's going to auto generate the U asset. There it is. Iris base color. It popped right into here. There's my custom color. So I can just drag it into there. And now I've got a custom color. Don't need my saturation anymore. There you go. So now I've got a custom texture. It's also source file is a PSD, so I could just open that PSD and change it, and then it would auto update as soon as I save. So really simple, easy workflow for doing custom textures and iterating like that. All right, so that is the eye. Now let's finish up our model before we start polishing up the scene by importing the hair. So quickly, in case you don't know, the hair is going to be groom. So if I pop over to the hair file, you can see head hair. Okay, so back here in the source file with my model, you can see I've got my groom made up of XGen descriptions, and then I convert these to interactive grooms and then export them as Alembic files. So I have a video covering that too. We talked about this in the girl demo. So just glossing over that, just showing you like where it's coming from. All of the source assets for the hair and the final mesh are assembled here in Maya. And then back over here in Unreal, if we come over here to my directory, we can go to the hair. Here are the two ABC file or Alembic files that are exported from Maya. You can see here, they're not too big. That's a little bit big, but not too big. So yeah, so we can just drag these in. Let's put it in the meshes folder. Why not? So I'll first show you, we have to do some corrections. So let's get into that. That's the first thing to know about the hair stuff. You can drag it in and it's cool and it works. You should see this import dialog. Okay. And then we'll just import it. So there it is. Now I will say we're using the MetaHumans scene, remember, but if you were using your own scene, you do have to have the Alembic plugins. You gotta go to edit plugins. And then in here, we could search for groom and you can see Alembic groom importer and the groom rendering. There you go. But yeah, these have to be on, but because we're using the MetaHumans sample, you know, they're using that already. So you know it works. So it's another benefit of using that. So here it is. We can save to save our U assets. And now this is going to be the brows and the lashes. So if I drag it in, right? And then if I go to the origin, 000, you'd think it would pop on our face, but it doesn't. Look, it's all the way down here. So this has to do with Maya's orientation versus Unreal's orientation. I think could just be Alembic stuff. I'm not sure. The mirroring is a head scratcher, but I'll just show you how to correct for this, right? So location obviously going to stay the same. This we're going to do -90, 180 in Z, and then for scale and X, we're going to do -1. It actually comes in flip. So here you can see it on her face now. Before we move on a little bit longer, why don't I first show you some of the groom settings you might want to do here. So we'll open this up and we want to use ray tracing. Let's make sure we're using that now actually before we jump into that. So we'll go edit, project settings, shadows or something. Here we go. Ray traced shadows. This is off right now. That means we could turn it on per light, but I just want to use it for all my lights, right? So I'm just going to turn this on. There we go. And now the shadows, I don't know if you saw that. We might be able to like show you. Okay. So it says use project settings. So like say I do disable. There we go. So this is the shadows and the lighting we had before. This is not ray trace. This is more of the deferred rendering stuff. And then if we go enabled or just use project setting, which would be enabled, then there you go. So what's happened is it's gotten more accurate, right? It's almost like the resolution's gotten higher. So you can see the shadows that the lashes are casting isn't so chunky. All right. We have to complete that puzzle though. If we go to the groom settings here, opening up the groom asset viewer here, you can see right here on the main page of the strands, use hair ray tracing geometry. So now it's actually casting, you know, shadows on the actual curves. So it just got a lot more accurate. Okay, so that's one way to fix the hair. You could also just do it on import. So go back here, that was the face. Now we'll do the head. This one's gonna be heavy. We'll import it. So we can actually just do that fix right here. We can go -90, 180, and -1. And then now when we put that in the scene, I put that as 000, should snap right on our head. And then we'll go in here and we'll go use ray tracing. Boom. Okay, so for the hair material, covered that in another video too. So I'm just gonna drag that straight in here too. We have our material, here it is, hair custom master. I'm not following the name convention, but you know, whatever. So we'll go into master and then we'll go, and then I'll just paste it in there. So there you go. So now we have our master material for the hair. Create an instance, girl, hair, MI, plop it up one more, boom. There's the girl hair MI. So we'll look at this one first, put that right there. And then this one right there, cool. There we go. Already better, right? I'm going to gloss over this because we did do a video on this already, but you can see I can also change the color. So let's say we want this to be kind of a cool pinky red or something like that. We could increase the noise a little bit. Well, let's first show you the length mix. So if we mix that and then we use our little cheap contrast node, there we go. The noisiness kind of like breaks it apart is the idea, right? So that it's a little bit random feeling. And then we could change the length. If we want to show roots or just like make it halfway or something like that. Cool. So here's our pinky red hair for now. Now let's get a little fancy, okay? We have the basic setup of our scene. Let's first get a little fancy with the lighting. I'm gonna do a skylight. Okay, come up here, go to lights, skylight. Now a skylight is like an HDRI dome, if you're familiar. It's an environment light. Now normally it defaults to this captured scene because when you're placing it in levels for games and stuff, right, you want it to like be generated from the scene around it, but we obviously don't have a scene. So we're just gonna choose one. So I can just go to cube map and then just choose one from this directory. You know, based on your project, you're gonna have different ones. I think the Epic Quad is always available because that's, you know, they shot that. So I think that's just a default. But you can already see what's happened, right? We have some lift. If I turn this off, turn this on, because we literally had one light in like a vacuum of space. And so we're just using the skylight to like give it lift. So it's as if we're outside, you know? Now we could angle this too, like essentially rotate it to get like, if we want a certain reflection or something or backlight or something like that too. So I'll just put it here so it's a fill, and then I'm going to drop the intensity because I don't want it to be like that crazy, but you can see it just lifting it from darkness. I'm going to move on for a bit with this off. We'll get to putting the hair back on, but as I said before, it just really slows down the scene. Super heavy. We just want the hair there to look really nice and detailed, obviously, but we don't need it all the time. So you can just turn the visibility off. Okay, so we're getting a little bit fancier. Also, you can see the reflections. Maybe I can show you there too. Big difference, right? Metals need reflections. So that's better. Let's make another light. So something we can do is just hold Alt and drag. That'll copy something. And then why don't we just rotate this? There we go. So we got it right behind her. Okay. And now we're going to make this really big actually, because what I want is like a backlight. So we have this, we're going to do a little 2-point lighting setup. It's actually 3-point if you want to be technical about it, because the fill light, the third would be the environment. I like to do this, you know, in some looks where it's just like a huge light behind the person. So for source width, why don't we just go super big, super big. That also means we need to increase the intensity to compensate, because as you make lights bigger, like physically it gets, you know, less strong. Let's try 60 or something. So that's a lot, maybe 50, but you see the light wraps around her, right? It's pretty cool. Let's leave it at 10 for now. But you know, we're already getting something that's pretty interesting, more interesting than before. And now, so we're getting a little fancier with the scene. Now let's get fancy with the skin material. We're gonna start breezing through some notes right here. First thing, probably noticed for a while, and it's driving you crazy, is she's really glossy. Let's do something about that. So we'll go to the skin. Remember spec, we dropped that to 0.35. Can't really see a huge difference, but 0.35 is the recommended spec value, probably because skin absorbs light a little bit more, so it's reflecting less. Okay, let's go into the master and let's do some trickiness. Okay, get this over here a little bit. Okay. First, let's make a control for our roughness. We'll do what we did already with the SS strength. We're gonna do a roughness strength. So let's give ourselves some space here. Put our little combined map down here. So here's our guy, green, coming out into roughness. So let's do a multiply, scalar, and we'll do roughness strength, just like we did SS strength. And we'll go right there, we'll go right there, and we'll go right there. Now, this time, we're not gonna set defaults so that we can just overcrank and just fine tune whatever we want, right? So here we go, is our roughness strength. It went to 0, but yeah, so now I can go up and look at that. Now I can already dial it in just by dragging. So that's pretty nice, right? So there you go, looks more like skin. Now I feel like the light is still super bright. Getting a little bit more balanced, right? Okay, we're already cooking with gas here. Let's talk about micro normals. I love micro details and I love to use micro detail normals. Let's do a little soapbox about this. You know, I'll be asked questions about how you get really fine detail, how big you need to make textures, what kind of detail to put in Substance Painter. And I know I'm sounding a little bit like a hypocrite right now because I'm using an 8K normal map, but you know, shoot me, I don't know. But the idea is that with micro normal details is that you'll have a macro normal, which is these, the baked 1-to-1 normal maps. And those could be like 2K or 4K. And then you're gonna have a micro normal, which is a normal like this. So this normal map is micro, right? So little pores, little like this, skin cellular detail, you know? And then we can tile that. So that means the actual texel density, the density of pixels of resolution there, is going to be so high that it's equivalent to a texture that's way, way big. Rather than, again, putting that detail in the macro map, which would mean that it's in the texture, okay? So we're mixing two. One is gonna be tiled once, and one's gonna be tiled like 30 times, okay? And then we're gonna blend those two. And that's how you get this effect of just super, super high fidelity crispiness, okay? So I love doing that on everything. Let's show you a demonstration of that right now. We'll do it on the skin and we'll show you the difference, okay? So this is a micro normal texture from my skin kit, you know, that you can get. So I'm just gonna use that because I have it with me. So here you go. This is gonna be a cellular skin kind of texture. Let's go ahead and drag that right on. There it is. And now let's go to our master material and we're gonna start blending some stuff. We're just gonna make the normal map group. Let's make a group. Let's make a really nice material stuff. I'll show you some things that you may or may not be familiar with. Okay. So here we have our macro normal map, right? First, something we might want to do is have a normal strength. That's always fun, is like, I want my normal map stronger or I want it weaker. And again, rather than going back to Substance or somewhere and trying to dial it, save it, look, dial it, you can just put it on a slider. It makes it super easy, right? So let's do that. I can drag this out and then stop. And then I can look for flatten normal. There it is. And then I can drag this out and stop. And I can do a scalar parameter. Boink. And this is gonna be called normal strength. Might be a little bit odd, right? I'm using flatten normal. I'm just doing that because it just seems like the fewest amount of nodes to give this effect. I could be wrong here and maybe, you know, some math wizard's gonna be like, hey, that's not right. But because this is like the opposite, we're gonna do an inverse. To do that, it's called 1 minus. So if I put this in between here, okay, then that's going to be flipping it. What we see in the material instance is normal strength. So we feel like going to 1 is full strength, but it's really flipping it and going to flat normal behind the scenes. So we're being tricky, but it's okay. So we're going to default this to 1. Okay, now we want to drag our micro detail in here. And again, we can make it a parameter if we want. And we're going to call it detail normal, right? And now we're going to blend this. Same thing. So here, look, I'm just going to copy paste this. Boom, right? Now we're going to do this one. So look at that. Now we got strength on both. And we'll call this detail. That's so you can see detail normal strength. We need to blend these two normal maps together. There's a couple ways to do that. I think the best node is this one. It's called blend angle corrected normals. Okay. I think this gives you the effect that you want, which is essentially like taking the blue channel out so it doesn't stack. And it also says that if it corrects the direction of the normal map, what you could do is, right now it's just gonna be straight up and down, but like if you wanted to put like rotation controls in there and everything, it apparently would still work. So I think this is the best. You can see here the base normal is connected into the base normal, and then we're gonna do the detail as the additional normal. And now this is what goes into normal. So if we hit save, we might see something scary. Oh gosh, that's not good. That's because we don't have the UV tiling controls we talked about. That's the whole thing about detail normals, right? So let's make some UV tiling stuff. Again, really useful things to know. Okay, so we're gonna do texture coordinate, and then we're gonna do multiply. Oh, that's an N. Okay, and then we're gonna do scalar parameter, and we're gonna call this detail tiling. And that goes into the UVs. So we're multiplying the texture coordinate with the scalar parameter number, which is going to give us the tiling amount. For the tiling default, we should probably do like 10 because it's a detail normal. Ew. But then here, let's go in here now. So we have all this exposed. Now we've got all this nice stuff, right? Oh, we want to be fancy, right? Let's be fancy. Talked about groups, right? Let's do that. So group, watch this. We're going to go normal. Okay, so now we have normal, right? And I can go group, normal, group, normal, group, normal. Probably could have done all this at once. Normal, okay. Save. And look at this. We have a normal group with everything in here. We're so fancy, dude. Our pants are so fancy. Okay, so now I'm going to come in here and then still looks gross, right? I get you. But we can tile it so much. See what I mean? And then you can zoom in. I'm getting clipped here, but this like cellular pattern. See what I mean? Let's do strength so you see like with and without. So that's without. So you can see it just like brings in a level of micro cellular pattern, right? That feels organic. I still think we can go like way more like, there we go. So there's after, there's before. See it on the lips too. See how it breaks up the highlight? That's what you want. Details. We've got a fancy shader now. Cool. We could also overcrank the skin now if we wanted to. Do we want to? I don't know. They look kind of cool actually, so I don't know. It's hard to not overcrank normal maps. I don't know what it is. You know, I'm just gonna leave it, but maybe just a little bit. I just can't help myself. Like, why not just overcrank it a little bit? You know, just a little more. Better, right? Here we go. Here's our lady. Cool. Might think we're already good, but we can make it a little bit fancier. Let's talk about how we would render this, okay? And then I can kind of show you like the workflow, the turnaround, and the before and after, okay? So let's make a camera. Come up here, cinematic, camera actor. Here we go. And we're gonna call it shot cam. That's fine. So normally you can just pilot these. I'll show you. Like for instance, I can come in here and go to shot cam, right? And I can pilot it like this. I just wanted to make sure it was rotated because I'm going to do, this one's going to be a flat one. And then we'll get a little bit more creative. We're going to disable the focus right now so that we can get this lined up. Okay, now, so for portraits, typically you want to do 85 millimeter or higher, especially with women. That's just like you don't have to. I'm just telling you like what people do most of the time. Right now, the current focal length is 35. So if I change this to 85, there you go. The reason why they do that, we probably have already talked about this, but it's because these bigger focal lengths compress the image more. You know, the opposite end of the spectrum would be a very small focal length, and that would be like a fisheye, right? And what happens? Things get warped, and things towards the middle look bigger. They get enlarged. So for a face, it would make like the nose look more enlarged and things like that. So essentially the compression, it makes the features look smaller, and it also separates from the background a lot more. So typically that's what people use. So here's our first shot. Now let's talk about how we would render these out. Let's complete the puzzle, right? We have the meshes in here. We've got our master materials. We've got our hair. We've got our lighting. Now we need to set up our kind of render workflow. Okay, so we're gonna use Movie Render Queue. To do that, we need a sequence. So let's close the content browser for now. And we're gonna create a level sequence, okay? Boom. You can put it in cinematics. That's usually where they go. Or you could put it in the character, whatever you want. And we're gonna call it girl sequence. Obviously, this is my demo character name. Just name it your character name. All right, so now we've got a sequence. So now what I can do is, we don't need all these frames because we're just rendering out images. We're not doing it like a movie, right? Do like 4 or something. So here we go. We got 4 frames now. And we don't have anything in our sequence, but we can drag our shot cam in there though. Yoink. So there we go. Now it's just easier. 1, 2, 3. We have 3 frames and it starts with 1. So 1, 2, 3. There we go. Now, what I can show you is, before we render it out, I can show you something that I think is pretty useful. And that is when we're in the cinematic viewport, we can use these guides, which really helps. See what I mean? Like she's not centered. So I can center her, kind of work on my composition, you know, they got different ones. So there we go. So now we're good. And now I could render this out. Before we do that, why don't we do a couple angles, okay? So we got shot cam 1 right here. We'll do shot cam 2 and we'll change this up. Piloting, we're a pilot now. And then why don't we make this like 100, so we're like farther away and we're like looking at the side and we're like looking at her, you know? And then we'll do another one. Let's do shot cam 3. And then we'll do shot cam 3 and then maybe like down below, like an up shot, or maybe like a detail shot would be nice. Okay, what if it was 200? Is that crazy? Now, before we do these renders, let's do the focus stuff, show you how I do that, okay? So remember we disabled it, focus method disabled. We're gonna do manual. Let's use this plane. So we got the debug plane, this is purple thing. We're gonna line this up. We're gonna put the plane right through the eye. That's the focal plane. There you go, so right in the eye. Okay, so that's the focal plane. Now it's really out there. Now the way that the depth of field is, you know, made is it simulates actual aperture. So 2.8 is really low. So maybe something like 6. Let's just make sure, does this work? Yeah, so 20. 20 even is not bad. We'll do 10. Okay, so that's that one. So that's shot cam 3. Let's go to shot cam 2. And we'll do that. Manual focus, draw debug plane, focus distance. Right in the eye. Good. And then aperture, we'll take off the plane. Aperture, something like 6, 8. I'm looking at the ear right now. It's also is going to look a little bit different once we do the render. Okay, we'll do 8 for now. And then shot cam, our main camera. Let's go there. This one, I think I want a pretty big focal plane here. Pretty subtle, just to get the flyaways. Okay, manual. Hey, that's not bad. 200 on the money, dude. Let's do it. Now for aperture, this one I'm going to do like 20. Yeah. So I'm going to save this. Here we go. So now we got 3 cameras. Remember, we got 3 frames. Let's drop them right in there. So let's go shot cam 2. We're going to drop it right in here. Shot cam 3. We're going to drop it right in here on the 3rd frame. It automatically will put it in the sequencer too. There you go. So you can save the sequencer too, by the way. Again, Control-Shift-S just saves everything. So now we've got our 3 frames. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. All right. And then you could have as many of these as you want, by the way. When I do projects, sometimes it's 4 or 5. And then maybe at the end, I don't use all of them, but it's just a way for me to do what we're about to do, which is to save a series of images that let me look at it close up in high res. And then I can kind of decide what work to do, what iterations and improvements to try and make. And then I'll render out another sequence and compare. And I do that a lot. That's why I'm trying to show you how we get set up. And then we could just iterate. All right, so now to continue on, we got to go to the render settings. So if we click this little clapper, it'll open up our movie render queue. Let's actually, before we go in here, I don't know if it's always going to be set up for you, but if you hit the 3 dots, you can see the 2 render movie settings here, and we want movie render queue, which I think in Unreal Engine 5 is always here. We want movie render queue. This is it right here. So now what we're gonna do is make a little preset. Here's our girl sequence, come in here, and now we're gonna choose our settings. So we'll just keep it JPEG and deferred for now, easy peasy. Something we might wanna change here is do 3840 by 2160. We wanna choose our directory. So say we do render demo, saved, movies. Maybe this could be called movie render queue just so we know what we're doing here. Okay, and then girl, yeah, select folder, cool. And now I don't want it to override existing output, remember, because I want to keep doing this over and over. The defaults everywhere else I think are going to be the same, gonna be fine. We do want to do the whole playback range, so we don't have to click that, so that's good. Now let's add some fancy stuff. If you come up to setting, lots of fancy stuff. You can go super deep into movie render queue, by the way, and you should. The documentation that Epic does is really good. William Voucher has great videos on it. It does get updated, so make sure you're looking at the right versions, but you know, you can export super high res EXRs if you want to do things in post. You can do the path tracer, you can do these high resolution things, which I've done for like print quality, which actually use your GPU to like render quadrants or stitch a quilt. So you can make huge 16, 32K images with even modest GPUs, because it's like as if it's rendering multiple images and stitching it together. So there's really cool stuff you can do, but we're gonna do the basic one, which is anti-aliasing, which sounds basic, but it's still super dope. So when we talk about rendering with Unreal, there's lots of ways you can do it. Obviously Unreal predominantly used for real-time rendering for games, obviously, which means they got to do a render 60 times every second. And we're not doing that. We're just going for quality. So what we're talking about is things you would do for portfolios, things you would do for cinematics and intros and like splash images and like, you know, the highest of highest qualities. Ours are going to be maybe one every 60 seconds rather than 60 every 1 second. And so some of the things we're doing is making a big image, in this case just 4K, but also we're going to use these anti-alias settings. And essentially what we're doing is we're having the render happen multiple times and then it's going to combine it. So that's really nice. That's a way that we can get smoother edges, crisper images, you know, less noise in blurriness. So temporal counts, let's do 16, and then we're going to override the anti-aliasing. So we're going to do 16. You could also go 32. So I'll show you though, we're going to save a preset. So we're going to go save as preset and we're going to do, okay, we're in cinematics. Good. So we'll go girl render preset. Boom. Okay, so now if we were to close our project and open it later on, we could open up our level. Our sequencer is still going to be there. Go to movie render queue and we just have to, you know, choose our little preset and it'll be there. So we can just keep this going. Okay, now if we hit render, it'll go through and render our images. And you can see in the lower right, starting to warm up. And then there you go, subsample is going to 16. Again, you could go much higher, but you can see it's rendering it, you know, 16 times to make that one image. All right, here's our nice macro shot. Okay, now let's go look at what we did. So we're going to open up our project directory. Let's take a look, full screen. There we go. So see a little bit more detail than we could see in the engine. You know, kind of zoom in. And here's our little macro one. See the little micro details here. Okay. As I said, I like to get this kind of setup going, a couple of different angles, and then we take a look like we're doing now, and then we can make some changes and then do like a comparison. I don't know, for example, let's try to change the hair color. I'll show you updating a texture, and then we'll see if we can get these jaggies a little smoother too. Let's see. All right, so let's jump back here. Let's see, first things first, let's do default viewport, and let's change some materials, which is cool that they are material instances, right? We can just start changing materials. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Go to the hair. Why don't we see what, I don't know what color it would be. Maybe like an orange. That'd be kind of cool, like Fifth Element. Oh, that's kind of cool, actually. And then we could even like make it a little bit more rough, you know? And speaking of, we can get a little even more tricky here. I actually kind of like this. Okay, I gotta stop or else, you know, I'll never stop. So let's go to here and like check this out. We'll duplicate it and then we'll go lashes, even though I'm gonna use it for the brows too. And then we'll click that. Okay. So here's our lashes now, right? And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it rougher. So I'm gonna come in here and go 0.5. There we go. And then I'll also disable that and then I'll make it even darker. Let's go ahead and get a little fancier. Okay, we all like getting fancy. We're gonna go to the skin master material here. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make the spec fancy, okay? And we're gonna be able to compare that too. Normally with materials for PBR, spec can just be a constant value, somewhere around 0.45, zero point 0.4, something like that. Most objects on Earth, and typically you don't really touch that. We can make an exception sometimes to put detail in the spec. I think a very easy, common one to understand is cavity map. And what you would do is you make a black and white map where those areas are black and you plug it into spec, thereby making it so that doesn't reflect any light whatsoever. Okay, now I say those are some kind of edge cases. You don't always make maps for spec, but we're going to use the spec map now for the skin. The reason we're going to do that is if you take a look at the detail now, it looks okay and you can see it in the highlight. But if you're doing a path trace or something more accurate, a lot more complicated things would be going on. These little tiny form changes would actually be casting shadows and they would be occluding, light wouldn't be spreading as evenly. Because we're doing a real-time render, we can't get that complicated. So a texture map helps in adding complexity. So in this case with spec, what we could do is have a cavity map that has all these little details in it and then have it affect the spec so that it feels like the lighting is a lot more intricate and high quality. So we can do that with our texture map. Let's take a look at the texture map now. Let's go to girl textures. Here's our spec map. So we'll drag it in here. And you can see how it's got a lot of details in it, right? It's 4K in this case. It's not 8K, but it's still okay. It's still got a lot of detail in it. You can see I blacked out the nostrils and then all these little details. So this should help. It has a lot of variety and detail in the spec. Now what we're going to do though is we're not just going to straight up plug it in. We're going to get fancy. Why not? And I'll show you another node that I think is useful. First, let's go to multiply. And then we're going to name this spec power. And then we'll default this to 1. I don't know if this gray value is actually 0.4. That's why I'm making controls here because we're going to have to eyeball it. Okay, so yeah, this is definitely not enough. So if we go to spec power, spec power is up. So you can see we have to go quite high to get the spec back. But there's detail in our spec. That's cool. You can kind of see it here in the lip. But we can get even more control. And to do that, we'll use a node called cheap contrast, which is like a contrast thing that we're all familiar with. So to do that, let's go right here and we'll put this in between the multiply. So we want to be able to play with the contrast of all the spec detail. So we'll plug that into N and we'll go right there. And then from here, we'll do a scalar parameter and we'll call this spec contrast. So we can go negative and then it's like nothing. And if we go too much, it's too much, right? But now we can dial it in. So now you can see it feels like the pores aren't getting lit up as much. Now for the value, we can still like come back here and I'll show you another thing that's awesome. These debug viewers. So for buffer visualization, like if I were to do overview, like you can see all the buffers, right? Here's specular, here's base color, here's roughness. This helps you and you can look at the individuals. So if we go to specular, there we go. And here you can see the shirt, which is 0.4, right? So we know we can go up a little bit. It's gonna be a little bit darker, right? But we can also see the contrast in the spec, how much we wanna get. There we go. So we got some more detail in the spec now. There we go. We got fancy, didn't we? Okay, now let's do another little turnaround here. Boom. Back over in Substance. Along with the iterating, you can iterate on a bunch of things, but like just as an example, we could just do a little tattooing here, and just do the color over here, and we'll just do I don't know, just a little hardy poo right here. Setting in. So now if we come to export settings, choose our directory. So we gotta go render demo, content, girl, textures, select folder. There we go. Let's go into the textures folder. We're just going to export these two and then we'll hit export. There we go. We go back and see it's bringing them in. Auto updated. Bam, bam. There you go. So now we're going to do the sequence again. So we're going to come up here, open up our sequence. There we go. Anything that's like not visible, it's going to show up in the render. So come over here to the movie render queue. We got our preset. Good. So we can just hit render local. And it's going to save out 3 more images. And we can compare. Okay, there we go. Cool. Okay, so let's go this one. We got a little before and after here. So yeah, it's pretty subtle, but you can see extra detail now because of that spec mask. See our texture came through, which we can see even better here. So a little texture addition. And there you go. So here are my final renders. And that is how you can use Unreal Engine 5 to produce high quality images and even videos for your custom characters. We touched on a lot of things there, I know, including things like materials and lighting and all that stuff. We could go really deep on those topics, and I do hope to do that. This, again, hopefully is a big overview of like soup to nuts on getting started, and you could go so many places from there and iterate a lot at the end. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you are someone who's interested in learning more about character modeling and building your own characters like this, doing things like for portfolios and things like that, I'm in the middle of creating my next course right now, and you can go to charactermodeling.com and you can sign up by putting in your email address. And I'm just collecting email addresses right now for people that are really interested, so that I can notify them when enrollment opens. For this next course, for at least the first running, I want to do it with people signing up. We'll do it live, as well as have videos drop every week, and then we can get together each week and talk about it and do reviews and stuff like that. So it's something I've done in the past. I think it's a great model for learning together. So if that's something that might interest you, go ahead and sign up. I don't know exactly when the course is going to be done. As I say, I'm in the middle of it now. Hopefully 2022, but as soon as it is done and enrollment opens, I'll let you know. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching up to this point. Really appreciate it. I hope you learned something, and go make something cool. Peace out.